welcome back, and today I'm very excited to share with you an interview that I done recently with Shaun O'Connor. Now, Shaun is the creator of the DP manual. He has helped thousands of people all around the world to recover from depersonalization, anxiety, panic attacks, etc. etc. Now, if you're dealing with any of these symptoms, please do stick around. He shares his insights and his story on how he recovered from DPDR and what made him put together the DP manual. Now, this is a series of interviews that I'm putting together. I'm reaching out to different people out there who have put together courses to help you recover from these anxiety conditions. Now, if this is something you're interested in, make sure you subscribe and please hit that like button if you like what you see. Now, if you have any questions with Shaun after the interview, make sure you put them in the comments below. He will get back to you as soon as possible. And let's just get straight into the interview. Now, before we start, I have to apologize. I am using my old Mac. Usually I use my phone for these videos, but I am using my Mac computer. It's a few years old, so the quality isn't great, but I'm not talking too much, hopefully not. So it shouldn't really have any effect. So hopefully you enjoy the interview. And if you have any questions, again, make sure you shoot them in the comments below. All right, thanks Shaun for joining me today. This is just going to be a short interview. I will see where it goes. I like to keep things pretty casual, and we just talk about this. I find a very important topic, depersonalization, something that both of us dealt with, and thankfully both of us are at the other end. And my goal with these interviews is to try and find, is there any connection to people who have recovered? So there's a couple of people I plan to interview. You're my first one. Success leaves clues. So that's what the goal is with these interviews. So hopefully people can take something away from it. So Shaun, you're from Ireland. You are a multi-award-winning filmmaker. What you've been doing for how many years now?
I made my first film when I was 28 years old, which would have been back in 2009. 2009. Yeah. So I'm at it nearly 12, 13 years, 15, 14 years. My maths is, man, award-winning filmmaker, terrible at maths, like.
The same. And so before this is when you had your instance with depersonalization. So from 2005 to around 2007. And then after 2007, you went on to create the DP manual, which has helped thousands of people around the world. And you've also been featured on BBC and the BBC website, where you wrote an article about depersonalization. So you have a wealth of experience in this area. Part of the reason why I wanted to get you on here. And let's just start with your story and how it all happened for you. And we just start from the beginning.
Sure. Yeah. So it would have been back in, you're right. It was before my filmmaking career, but it was after college. So I was back when I was 25 years old, which would have been 2005. And I was working away as a giggy musician. I hadn't yet started the filmmaking career, but I was, in that kind of little space between after college and trying to figure out what I was actually going to do. I was doing a bit of web design and stuff as well back then. And I basically one night I had a panic attack at my parents' house while I was sitting alone watching TV and just having a beer. I was watching the film Heat, actually, which is one of my favorites. I love it. And just in the middle of watching it, I just I had what I later realized was a panic attack, but at the time I just felt like I was just, something snapped and I was going crazy, and I felt like I was just absolutely terrified. I remember thinking I felt like reality was like closing in on me, or that it was going to collapse. I remember feeling that, even though I wasn't seeing anything visually. I mean, it was things kind of felt like we're becoming kind of 2D, but there was nothing specifically visual about it, but it just felt so strange and frightening. And a good way to describe it was like, it felt like just a pane of glass just got slid between me and the world. And it was very, very frightening. And I turned off the film and I went up to bed. And I think I was probably still having the panic attack at that stage, but it faded away, or it wore off at least. And then the next morning I woke up, and I went to bed that night thinking like, I'll sleep this off, be grand, like, this is really, like, I didn't know it was a panic attack, but it's like something really strange happened, but whatever it was, I'll sleep it off and I'll be fine.
Have
And
you ever anything like that in the past?
no. So to give context to that, a few weeks beforehand, I had gone to Amsterdam with some friends,
Mm.
and I got off the plane, went straight to the hostel, dropped the bags off, then went straight to a cafe and got a joint.
Yeah.
And now I was used to smoking, but like it was not, it would have been, fairly weak stuff, like, or whatever. It wasn't, it's just at parties and things. But we got a joint in the cafe, and it was like multiple times the strength I anticipated. It was like, I actually thought that somebody must have put LSD into it. It was that strong. I was like full on hallucination. It was like I couldn't remember where I was. I didn't know how I got there.
Wow.
Ended up walking around the streets of Amsterdam for like a couple of hours. my buddy, to his eternal credit, he was very he was very patient with me. And but it was very, very frightening. I'm not sure if I could kind of retrospectively consider it to have been like a panic attack, but I suppose it may have been. But regardless, it was a very, very frightening experience. But I eventually came down. I was okay. I was pretty shaken. And then, the rest of the weekend was in Amsterdam was fairly quiet on my part anyway. I just had maybe a couple of beers or something. But one of the scariest things about having the panic attack a couple of weeks later at my folks' place was that I felt like I was back in that weed headspace. I felt like I was thinking like I did when I was high on weed, and even though I hadn't taken anything, that was really frightening, because then I thought, well, I obviously smoked so much that I flicked a switch in my brain, and now I'm stuck thinking like this. I'm high and I'll never come down. I'm a drug casualty. All these types of things, um, jumping to the worst possible conclusions. So it was in that state then that I woke up the next morning from the panic attack in my folks' place. And the first thing I did was check to see, was this strange feeling still there, this feeling of disconnection.
Mhm.
And it was. So like, hours later after a night's sleep, and this feeling is still there, and I started to panic. I started to freak out and went about the day. I remember like eating and kind of being around my mom and my sister and stuff, and like, and thinking, this is going to pass. Like, this is definitely going to pass, because like this isn't right at all. But also it just kept going, it kept staying there, and I didn't know what to do.
With your parents or to your family, did you explain to them what you're experiencing, or did you just keep it to yourself?
Initially, no. Initially, I didn't say anything. I may have said something like I was feeling weird, but like,
Yeah.
it was it no, it was it was so difficult to describe anyway. I'm not sure how I would have been able to describe it. And when I did end up like describing it, like maybe weeks, even months later, it would have been stuff along the lines of, I don't feel like I'm here, or I feel like I'm in a dream, or I feel like I'm watching myself from a distance. I feel like I'm in a dream all the time. That kind of thing. But like, but to be for the first couple of days and probably weeks of it, Stephen, I kept thinking like, this is going to pass. Like, I've no idea. Like, this is really bizarre and frightening, and it's preventing me from doing things, because things just became so scary, because everything felt absolutely terrifying, like going to the cinema, hanging out with my friends, playing music. So I was living and working in Cork, and my folks were in Kerry, and then it got to a point where I couldn't work anymore. I couldn't play music live anymore, which is what I was doing for money at the time. And so picked up and moved home with my parents for a while, and I just explained to them what was happening. They were great. They were really supportive and patient, and I was able to stay there for as long as I needed. But then it was only like probably I might maybe a couple of months later that I actually came across the term depersonalization in just on some online forum, and this was like, but like I'm not even sure if Facebook existed then,
Hmm.
but it certainly didn't have like forums dedicated to things
Yeah.
like this. So, but I did find a group online on a website that were talking about this condition, this symptom, and I was looking at it going like, that's it, like that's the thing I have. And I proceeded to then have what is one of the most common experiences that I hear of from people is having the initial moment of recognizing it and going, ah, that's what it is. That's what the thing is. Like that's this, it has a name, brilliant.
Yeah.
And then the next step is you see people who've had it for,
Yeah.
10, 15 years, and they say that, there's, you have to live with this is, and absolutely panicking and freaking out and thinking I could barely do this for like 2 months. How am I going to do this for like 10 years,
That, you're saying that was like 2005 to 2007, and in
Mm.
my experience was around 2012, and even then there wasn't. No, I wasn't too good with Facebook. I rarely used it. Maybe there was some forum set up then, but I found a very hard time to find anything. There was one forum that I could come across, was I think it was actually called a DP forum. And in there, it was just saying it was just people just saying that they had it for many years, just got to learn to deal with it. And I was like,
Yeah.
no, can't take this for an answer. But sorry, continue on what you're saying.
No, that's absolutely right. Like, and and then you're kind of caught in this like liminal space between,
Yeah,
having a determination to do something about it and saying like, and then the thing is, then like you also see other people who have recovered, and you see people who say, oh, I had it for like 3 months and I recovered completely, and you're kind of going like, okay, so it's possible to recover completely from this. What's the difference? Like, what's the difference
yeah,
between this person and this person? And then the fear becomes, well, what if I have the type of depersonalization that lasts for longer? What if I have the type that lasts for 10 years rather than the type that lasts for, 2 months? Do I just have to wait and see? Is there anything I can do about it? At the time, and I'm sure you can speak to your experience about this, Stephen, like, but I mean, I remember going to a doctor and like describing what I was feeling, and it was, and even describing it is quite frightening, because you are, you're saying things like, I don't feel like I'm here, or I feel like I'm in a dream, which they sounds like something that, like, a crazy person would say, if you
yeah,
yeah. So um and then I said these things to my doctor, and I was, I was thinking, I'm going to be put away, I'm going to be end up in an asylum by the end of the day. That didn't happen, obviously, but he said that sounds to me it sounds to me like it is anxiety. Now, he didn't know, and I could see when I was explaining the symptoms to him that he didn't recognize them, and that in itself was scary. But to his credit, he
yeah.
did say it sounds like it's anxiety and symptoms of anxiety. So even though I really could have used more information and help than that, at least he was correct in saying that. But then in another sense, people often have a really difficult experience in terms of speaking to doctors, where they will say, well, it's just anxiety. And the thing is that, like, technically they're correct in that depersonalization is a symptom of anxiety, but um they people need a lot more guidance than that. If someone has agoraphobia, for example,
Mhm.
and like a doctor shouldn't just say, oh, that's anxiety, even though, okay,
Yeah, yeah,
it's an anxiety based condition, but like, you're going to need more than that. And at the time, for me, back in 2005, that was a deeply frustrating aspect to it, was that, like, I just couldn't get a straight story of what was happening, why it was happening, and what I needed to do about it. It was just this conflicting information everywhere,
Mhm.
conflicting stories, misdiagnoses, like you name it. So then I ended up going into the thing where that a lot of other people do, which is trying absolutely everything. You know, I
Yeah.
mean, you name it, I tried it.
Yeah, because I found it was so frustrating because I go to one doctor and try and explain the same thing. They didn't have an answer for me. They just gave me some medication, and I thought,
Mm,
"Yeah, I'm not going to dive into this medication. I'm going to go for a second opinion." And then the other doctor thinks it's something else, and then he gives me these other medication. And I went to 3 or 4 doctors. I'm going in with all these medications to him, saying like, "Which ones do I take? They're all different." And he's like, "Who gave you this? They're antipsychotic. You don't need them. Who gave you this?" And I'm just like, "Who do I trust? You guys are supposed to be the experts here, you know." But then
yeah.
again, I can't blame them because there's not a lot of information out there on this, even with like psychiatrists and psychologists. Maybe now it's changed, but back then it was very hard to find someone who actually knew what it was, you know?
Absolutely, absolutely. And you know what, the as frustrating as the experience was for me, like I completely understand as well that that the I don't it's the awareness of this is growing in the medical community.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the reasons it's not as well known in the medical community, or it certainly wasn't back then, was because it's so difficult to describe. So, if a patient comes in and says, I feel like the walls are closing in around me and I feel terrified when I get onto the subway or into a car or into an elevator, and the doctor will say, okay, that's called claustrophobia. That's a anxiety-based condition. That here's what you do. Here's some CBT. Here's some exposure therapy. Come back to me in a couple of weeks. You know. Whereas if somebody comes in and they say, and you're trying, and they find it very difficult to even describe what's happening, um,
So,
it's it's much more difficult to diagnose, but it's also much more difficult to study in a large scale, because this kind of diagnosis and research, the, the because it's relatively difficult to diagnose, and that's changing, but because it's been so relatively difficult to diagnose, that has made it also relatively difficult to study, as opposed to like finding, you know, finding a hundred people who have claustrophobia or agoraphobia is a lot. Is it?
I'm sorry,
Go
go on.
ahead.
I'm just saying, yeah, like they're like external fears that they're scared of, but it's more internal. You start becoming scared of the awareness is turned inwards, and
Yeah.
it's and the outside world is this dream state. So it's like, yeah, how do I fix the fears I felt for me was turned inwards. It was like the camera lens looking at itself in a weird kind of way, and it's like, yeah, as you said, it's not as if you can just go and just expose yourself to that fear, and over time, it's like I'm in it. It's like, what do I? How do
Yeah.
I? How do I undo all this?
Absolutely. But in the last couple of years, the awareness of it, because of things like that, like the BBC and the Guardian did a great piece on it. Unreal Charity in the UK, Dodie, the British singer, are really drawing attention to it, and that kind of, as it becomes more known in kind of popular culture, but also just among the medical community in general, um, the the people do not have to wait as long for a diagnosis, as they would have done when we would have had it. So the medical community is absolutely catching up, and
Mm-hmm.
quite quickly too, which is fantastic to see.
Yeah, for sure. So then, what was that turning point for you when you were like, okay, now I feel like I can do something about this, and what was that?
It was so at the beginning, it was I looked up every single thing I could about it. I read every single book I could about it. I read every single book I could about intrusive thoughts, about anxiety, about cognitive behavioral therapy. And like, in terms of like, it's great to have that experience, and I'm very grateful to have that knowledge now. And I, have hopefully been able to synthesize it. And when I'm, speaking to people, I can refer to that stuff. But at the time, it was like the worst thing I could have done, because I just became obsessed with it. Like day in, day out, all I was doing was researching it, talking about it, posting online. Yeah, it was, and then trying all these different things.
Can I just interrupt just for a second? I
Mhm.
think that in itself, that's a huge step of just filling your day with something to focus on. Because for me, that was a big one for me. Just when you said that, like your focus was just like studying everything you could learn about the symptoms and what was going on. And then for me, my background, I'm a personal trainer. I'm involved with the fitness industry for many years. So learning different skills, like I got into hand balancing, I got into rock climbing, juggling. Like I was just like just filled my days up with activities. And then over time, things started to settle, and then I could kind of yeah, I feel just when you were saying that, just when you just went straight away, like you just started getting obsessed. That was, I feel, that was the catalyst. I'll let you finish, but I just wanted to get that in there. And I think for people listening, it is important to find something that obviously, if you have some underlying traumas, they do need to be addressed. But I feel, depending on it, maybe that's better later when your body's recovered. So if you can distract yourself, find something healthy or something that keeps your mind occupied, and over time, then later on when you feel ready, you can face that trauma. But then some people, you don't have a real trauma. Like for you and for me, I was just taking on too much. For you, it was probably just some residual from that weekend you had in Amsterdam. Just the body was just run down, and you don't know what it was. To start my
Yeah,
sorry, continue.
yeah, no, absolutely. And I mean, I guess when I found positive distractions, I mean, I did get to a point where I felt like I was just so sick of listening to myself and thinking about this all the time. And when I started like distracting myself with other things, that really, really helped. And it's a huge part of, you know, cognitive behavioral therapy, even just reframing thoughts, like, and, you know, but, and just the power of distraction in general. But when I was obsessed with like DP and anxiety, it was it was not a good obsession to have while in the midst of experiencing anxiety and DP, because it just contributed to my thinking about it around the clock. Um, Whereas once I, through trial and error, and trying different things, I found that like a huge moment for me was like realizing that, like, because I felt that like if I kept researching it, I would that would make it easier. It would help me to deal with it. And as any anxiety specialist will tell you, like, researching something obsessively is it's not going to, when you're researching the condition itself, is not going to it's not going to help. It can actually slow down recovery a lot. Um, so when I managed to kind of like unstick myself from that and focus on other things that had nothing to do with anxiety and DP, and then I realized that, well, that's actually reducing the anxiety. Like the weirdest thing, when I stopped focusing on this and trying to obsessively find a solution online, counterintuitively, it actually helps. It reduces the anxiety when I actively focus away from it. And that was a huge moment, because then I realized that, well, I actually have a modicum of control over this. I can reduce this by like 5% or 10% by just doing a certain amount of specific things. And when I realized that, then I realized, hang on, if I can reduce this by 10%, I can reduce this by 100%. It's just a matter of doing the correct things and getting out of these habits that I thought were good and productive and healthy, but they were actually just reminding me of this condition day in and day out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a tricky one, as you said.
Mm.
And that's what I meant by finding that something that you can get obsessed with. Um, for you, when you were saying, did you find when you were going down the route of studying CBD therapy and all these different other ways of treating depersonalization, did you find that helpful, or did you find that was still feeding the loop, or did that give you confidence that, okay, I'm getting somewhere? Like, it was like you're on an adventure, because that's what I find, like trying to create your own little adventure to keep you occupied.
So I think that it was like what I eventually did to recover was um it was based on like over a year, well over a year of trial and error, almost 2 years. And that like I had picked up stuff from different books, picked up stuff from different websites, but and I did eventually like find this system that worked for me, that just did that. It just reduced the anxiety and DP when I did it. The the problem was though that it was just like macheteing through a jungle, because I was constantly just finding like misinformation, not misinformation, just incorrect interpretations of what it was, and things that were kind of would just like completely freak me out. Like, even for example, people assuming that like it has to do with like spirituality, it has to do with religion, it's a spiritual experience. It's not. Like it's a super common mental symptom of anxiety. um but at the start when it happened, I was thinking, this is massive, like this could be a spiritual thing, like, and it's, is this a kind of a before and after thing in my life, and have I achieved some sort of kind of inverted enlightenment or something? No, no, it's not like, it's not nearly as dramatic as that. Like, it's the mental equivalent of muscle tension and heart palpitations. Okay, that's what it is. Like, like depersonalization as it pertains to like meditation and things is completely different. It's completely different, and it's because one is to do with intense focus and concentration, being meditation, and like depersonalization as it pertains to anxiety is based on racing thoughts and a defensive mechanism that the body kicks in at times of trauma. That's actually super common. I need to be specific, actually, at what it perceives to be times of trauma. So like, I wasn't going crazy or going to die in Amsterdam or having the panic attack or whatever, but my brain was thinking, yeah, but you might, like, so it brings in the, so to answer the question, is like, looking back on it, I feel I'm delighted that like you know I'm delighted I went through the jungle, and I was able to kind of like pick up all these things and find and put together a system that worked and discard the stuff that didn't work. But but what was most frustrating was that there just wasn't like a single source of information that would just say like, okay, this is it, this is what you have, this is why it's happening, this is why you're having these types of thoughts, this is why you're worrying about your vision all the time, this is why you're worrying about um I don't know, looking up at the sky, looking in a mirror. That's another super common one. Just someone will explain this and this, and why it was happening, and why you don't need to be afraid of it, and why it's temporary, and why you can and will recover. So yeah, that kind of inspired me to write the book afterwards.
Put together the DP manual. That was the start of the DP manual.
Yeah.
You just simplified. You're saving other people from cutting through the forest with the machete and finding the good stuff. So you just kind of put all your gems together, the stuff that you found made sense to you and worked for you, and put it together into your manual. What do you think, just before we talk about your course and what you offer, what do you think depersonalization is, and what's the reason for us to kind of tap into that?
So in some senses, it's, in one sense, actually it's actually quite well understood in terms of it being a defensive mechanism of the brain. So it's part of the brain's fight or flight response. So there are some other symptoms, mental symptoms associated with fight or flight would be like racing thoughts, inability to concentrate, and feelings of depersonalization, feelings of disconnection. This is why, yeah, as you mentioned, somebody sees a car accident or is in a car accident, and then they will later describe it as, it just felt like I was watching it from the outside. It just felt like I wasn't there, or it felt like I was watching from a third person perspective, right?
The freeze, they're calling it now, isn't it? The flight, fight, and freeze.
Right, yeah. So it's extremely common. Like 75% of people will experience depersonalization at some point in their lives. If you go through life without experiencing it, you're in a minority. It's that common. But again, for most people, it happens briefly and then it fades away as the anxiety fades away. But what happens to people in a lesser context, or less frequently, I should say, is when the feeling is focused upon and is interpreted as being something else and something dangerous. So if you're going through like a panic attack, or what happened to me, so I have a panic attack, but the scariest thing about it is this feeling of disconnection. Now, feelings of disconnection, super common with all anxiety-based conditions, they're super common with panic attacks and moments of trauma or perceived trauma. But what I did was those feelings came in, and along with every other symptom I was experiencing, but I focused on them and I said, something's wrong, something's up. So I seem to be high again, even though I haven't taken anything, or I'm in a dream, I can't wake up, or I'm going crazy. That's the big one, is I'm going crazy, because you feel like you're disconnected, you're not there, but you're focusing on those feelings. So in the same way that some people can focus on heart palpitations, which are, again, a normal part of the fight or flight response, but a person may focus on those heart palpitations and think, I'm having a heart attack, I'm going to die. And then that turns into a feedback loop with the anxiety that triggered it. So it's the anxiety in a feedback loop with the symptom of anxiety, and the person ends up going to hospital and saying, I'm going to die. And the doctor says, you're not going to die, you'll be grand, go on home for yourself, right?
Yeah.
It's essentially the same thing with the feelings of depersonalization. They're a normal and correct part of the brain's response to what it perceives to be trauma. But more often, when it happens because of a panic attack or a bad drug experience, because there's no obvious physical stimulus around, like a car crash or like violence or a mugging or something, then there's nothing to latch onto for what has caused it. So for me, it's sitting in my parents' place, watching Heat, having a drink, and then suddenly this feeling appears. There's no danger around. I'm not getting chased by a wild animal. So I immediately think, well, what's this feeling? Something is wrong. And in the same way that the person thinks that the heart attack means the heart palpitations are a heart attack, I presumed the feelings of disconnection were meant that I was going crazy. And then that turns into its own little feedback loop where you're constantly monitoring the feelings and checking to see, are they still there, going to sleep and waking up the next morning, and then the next morning waking up. And the first thing I did was I checked to see, was that feeling there, and checking it and checking and checking it, which causes it to persist and is not allowed to fade away naturally, which is what it is supposed to do.
Yeah. So your nervous system is relying on you to give it information to see if it's safe. So if you're worrying, the nervous system's already heightened, which triggers those fearful thoughts because it wants you to stay safe. And then you're attaching to those thoughts, which is just confirming to the nervous system that, yeah, Shaun's still not feeling safe here. And then it ramps up again. And it just it can be very hard to break that loop.
Yeah.
So let's talk about then your DP manual. So what is it? It's an ebook, and then there's some audio as well.
Yeah. So I mean, when I wrote it first, it was just an ebook. It was literally just like a little PDF, and I started sending it into forums and things and saying, this is what worked for me. And then the responses I was getting from that were amazing. Like, people were consistently getting back to me saying that it had worked for them too. So I thought, well, that's really interesting. And then over the years, I just developed it. started expanding it, rewriting it, making it better with each draft, with each new version of it, adding like frequently asked questions section, um, the audiobooks, an audiobook version of the whole lot of it, and something I just added a couple of months ago, which is a video section, which is it's videos of me speaking about the condition and the recovery process, in the same style that the stuff on YouTube is, but these are exclusive to the DP manual download. So it is, I think it's on its 4th version now, which is like a complete overhaul. And I'm always trying to improve it. You know, if I find that, like, if people are asking me a question, you know, over and over when when people contact me, I will say, okay, this is something that I need to include in the book, you know. So I've tried to make it as keep as relevant as possible. And yeah, it's been very, very helpful for a lot of people over the years. So I'm quite proud of it.
Nice. And you got a YouTube channel as well?
I do indeed. Started the YouTube channel, I think 2 or 3 years ago now.
Very good.
And Stephen, like so I work in film, but like I'm not someone who ever wanted to be in front of the camera. Like, absolutely not. And then I just saw that, like, it was just so important for me to have a presence on YouTube.
Yeah.
Just as, yeah, because I knew myself, like, when I back when I had anxiety and DP like this, if I had access to videos of people explaining to me what was happening, it would have just been so much. Like, I have an article section on the website, and there's dozens of articles there, and they're quite popular, you know. But I knew, like, at some point I'd have to get in front of a camera and just, like, literally, because I remember even my concentration back in the day was just, you know, as with all anxiety-based conditions, your concentration can be all over the place, and it can be difficult to sit down and read, you know, a 4-page article, because you're just going, oh my God, this is like, you know. Whereas if you click on a video and the video is like 10 minutes long, and it's just someone saying, how are you doing? This is what's happening. Here's what you do. Here's why you're experiencing this. Here's why you're experiencing that. Here's why you don't need to worry. So I got in front of the camera and started doing the YouTube stuff, and it's been really popular. And I've been, I actually enjoy doing it now.
Very good. So if there's anyone who's just new to depersonalization, I highly recommend check out the channel. If someone wants to reach out to you, just ask a few questions. How can they do that?
If they go to my website and go to the contact page.
Awesome. So I'll link everything in the description below. And thanks, Shaun. Really appreciate that. And yeah, make sure you check out his channel. And again, if you like what you see, you can click onto the dpmanual.com and you can find this course. Awesome, Shaun. Thanks again.
Great stuff. Thanks for your time, Stephen.
Yeah, no problem, mate.
Pleasure.